This is Crater Lake in southern Oregon. At 600 meters deep, it's the deepest lake in the entire United States. It may be hard to imagine, but 8,000 years ago, this lake didn't exist at all. And in fact, the basin occupied by the lake didn't exist either. Instead, there was a mountain here, a volcano called Mount Mazama. In what was one of the largest volcanic eruptions in the last several tens of thousands of years, Mount Mazama collapsed in on top of itself, forming a geologic feature called a caldera. And it's this caldera that Crater Lake now occupies. "8,000 years ago, Mount Mazama was probably the highest peak in Oregon. Crater Lake, which now occupies the caldera formed where Mount Mazama used to be, is nearly 600 meters deep. That's almost 2,000 feet, making it the deepest lake in the United States and the 8th deepest in the entire world. Several steps led to the formation of Crater Lake, starting with the development of a large magma chamber just beneath the volcano. Then, about 7,700 years ago, a large Plinian eruption began, forming a cloud that rose perhaps 50 kilometers into the atmosphere. Ash from this eruption has been recovered as far away as Greenland. Next, the column of ash and hot gas collapsed, initiating pyroclastic flows so hot that in places they compacted and formed a glassy, welded tuff. Finally, concentric fractures began to form encircling the entire mountain, and they became new sources for pyroclastic eruptions. This allowed the central part of the mountain to sink inward like a piston, as between 50 and 60 cubic kilometers of magma were removed from the magma chamber. The pyroclastic cloud was blown off to the northeast, and the pumice and ash that settled from that cloud covered an enormous area. Even today, there are large areas where the soil is so poor that plants have a hard time growing, like here on the Pumice Plain. Huge volumes of pumice fell from the pyroclastic cloud, and some blocks were moved large distances. This is pumice erupted by Mount Mazama and carried outward by pyroclastic flows, in this case almost 40 kilometers from the volcano. This pumice is very rich in silica, and it's got lots of vesicles, so much so that the density is very low and this stuff would easily float in water. The pyroclastic flows that carried this pumice outward were very energetic. Some blocks of pumice up to about 2 meters in diameter have been found 36 kilometers from what was Mount Mazama. Following Mount Mazama's collapse and the formation of the caldera, it soon began to fill with water. But over the next 500 years or so, volcanic activity continued and built 3 separate piles of volcanic rock and debris within the caldera. Only one of these rises above the surface of today's lake, and it's topped by a cinder cone, forming Wizard Island. Despite the violence of the eruption, some of the earlier history of the Mazama complex is still preserved, both outside the caldera and inside the caldera in the form of rocks re-exposed and now forming a small but well-known island. Right behind me is a little island in Crater Lake called Phantom Ship. Phantom Ship consists of 400,000-year-old andesite flows. Now, these were part of that earlier volcanic complex. It was buried as Mount Mazama grew and grew later on. But the big eruption that produced this caldera removed all those younger volcanic flows, re-exposing these 400,000-year-old rocks, which are now the oldest rocks you can find anywhere inside the Crater Lake caldera. It's important to realize that Crater Lake and what we see today represents merely a moment in the evolution of this volcanic complex. Future eruptions may well occur, most likely near the west end of the lake, inside the caldera.